Okay, so we still only have us 3 participants in the room, James, so I'll give it a couple minutes for people to trickle in. I'll start sharing the PowerPoint presentation here in a minute. Busy day? Yeah. Okay, folks, it is now 5:30. I'm going to give about another 2-3 minutes for some more folks to join online to get logged in. Looks like we've only got about 4 attendees right now, so give just a few moments. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Thumbs up. Can you see the presentation? Okay. All righty. So I see on the chat here that Jeff Retardigia. Jeff, we're going to present the same presentation that was presented last week. Last Tuesday, we had an afternoon meeting. I'm not sure if you attended that one, but it's a slideshow presentation. So we'll go through a couple slides and we'll open up some Q&A. I think we can try to do the chat, James. I need to test and see if me unmuting everyone will work or if it will, because I believe when I originally set up the webinar, that audio capability is not, that the attendees aren't capable to do that. So we can try it out. Otherwise, we'll just use the Q&A as we have for the past webinars. So we'll go ahead and get started. We are presenting information here today for the Short Range Transit Plan, which has been developed over the last 12 months or so. We've been working on this planning document. We've had several public meetings and webinars about it. And at this point, we have taken a draft to the board of directors and we are sharing it with the community, the plan document. We have specifically shared some pretty specific service plans for the next 5 years as one component of this plan document, but we'll focus today on the overall plan. And of course, we'll welcome any kinds of questions that anybody has on the plan document or any of the service improvements that we have. So today it's pretty light. It is James Drake and I. James Boyle, our planning director, he's not able to attend this afternoon, so I'll be going through a majority of the presentation. James Drake, our principal planner, will be covering a slide or two here and there, more focused on the service changes. And of course, he's here to answer any questions that anybody may have as well. So most of you already know what the SRTP is. We're calling our short range transit plan Sacramento on the move. And all transit agencies are required to have a short range transit plan. We're due for our next plan. The current one that we have is expiring this summer. So our next planning document is going to cover the fiscal years 2022 to 27. And as I mentioned before, the draft plan has been presented to the board of directors. That was done on February 14th. So we've had it up on our website, and we've been sharing the plan document with the community to get as much feedback and comments from the public. So that's an opportunity that we'll be providing today at this meeting as well. Before we get into the SRTP planning document, we did want to cover very briefly some of the service changes that we have coming up in April. James, did you want to cover this and go into this information in a little bit more detail, what we have coming up for April?
Sure. I wanted to just briefly check. Got about. I recognize a couple names from the MAC meeting where I discussed this last week, but yeah, I'll just dive in here.
Sorry.
So RT's been having kind of a manpower problem, like a lot of major employers. There's a labor shortage. We've been having difficulty retaining enough operators to operate what we have on the schedule. We've been hiring like crazy, but we have been unable. We've had a trend here for some time of being unable to completely fill all the service we have scheduled. So that's the basis for in April, effective in just a little under a month from now, we're going to be rolling back and suspending a little bit of our service. It adds up to about 3% of our service, which is a fair amount of service, but we are using the term suspension. It's all temporary. That's how we view it, and from a legal basis, it's temporary. These are changes that ordinarily would have had a more thorough public review, but that the nature of the issue we have right now, having an operator shortage called for kind of fast tracking some of this. So these changes were approved on a pretty short notice, and they legally can't be more than 12 months. We will be coming back and doing a more thorough review of them to go ahead and go through all our normal kind of more methodical processes for evaluating any service change. That said, the purpose of doing a more thorough analysis isn't so that we can make them permanent. It's really to follow in good faith our rules about analyzing any major service change we have. The idea is indeed for these changes to be temporary. And right now we're actually looking at in September kind of going back up to full service. We don't have a systemic budget problem. We have more of a temporal operator shortage, and we're hoping, I guess we're betting that we'll be able to fix that by September. So kind of, and it relates very much to the short range transit plan. The SRTP looks at 5 years, and it has a little higher level look at priorities, cost, design. We are right now working on kind of some of the year one changes in the SRTP, working them into our September package. So this September, we're looking at hopefully restoring and reversing these suspensions that will take effect in April, and potentially adding some of the year one SRTP improvements. Just to make sure we touch on what will be changing in April, Route 11 has some schedule adjustments unrelated to the suspensions. 19 has some schedule adjustments. Route 23 has some afternoon trips that will be suspended, where it currently runs at 15-minute headways, where we'll just be kind of stretching it to 30 minutes. Route 25 has just some schedule adjustments. Route 61, 67, and 68 also have some schedule adjustments. Route 81 has some significant suspensions. Right now, it runs every 15 minutes on Florin Road. We'll be suspending the trips that run only on Florin Road. So the Florin Road service will go to every 30 minutes. That actually will only be kind of like in the morning and the early afternoon. By around that will end at around 2:30, because starting around 3, schools get out and we just have a lot more ridership on the route. So we will be retaining the 15-minute headways after about 2:30. And there's a trip in the morning as well that's really heavy, that we'll retain. Route 82 has 1 trip and Route 86 has 2 morning trips that will be suspended. These are both trips that were added several years ago to address capacity issues that just aren't needed right now with ridership lower from COVID. And suspending those will basically save an entire bus. And then we have some of our peak only service. Route 107 will be entirely suspended. Route 134 will be suspended except for 2 very heavily used trips that go by Sutter Middle School. Route 142, the airport bus will go from 30 minutes to just hourly headways. And then Route 193 will be entirely suspended. And again, like I said, we're looking right now at hopefully restoring all of that in September. Some of the things I mentioned, like where we had a trip here or a trip there that was originally for capacity, if we're not having, overcrowding on the other trips on the route, we may not bring that back. That may be a good way to reduce resources. Again, we're trying to keep the total level of service somewhere manageable with the operator shortage that we have right now. Because if we are scheduled to run more than that we can actually staff, what that ends up being on the street is a bus that doesn't show up. It may be your bus to work in the morning, maybe your last ride home at night, but the reasoning here is it's probably a little better to let people plan around service that won't be running than for it to come up in an unplanned, disorderly way. So not something we're thrilled to have to do, but we're not the only transit agency that's kind of grappling with an operator shortage. We have been seeing things trend a little more favorably. The pandemic does seem to be sort of winding down, and that's not been, I think, the only factor affecting our labor shortage, but I think it's certainly been a significant one. So like I said, we do hope that in September, we'll be able to restore back up mostly to full service and maybe even add some things, maybe even add some service. And you can look for, we're anticipating actually going out at the end of this month or early April with some plans for that to review. So very timely kind of handoff from the Srtp to actual service delivery later this year. If I missed anything, let me know, Sarah. Otherwise, I'll hand it back.
Okay, thank you. So that covers what's happening in the near term for April. Going back to Srtp, our planning document to cover the next 5 years. Just very briefly, it's a large document and it covers a lot. So this slide just goes through the various sections and chapters that we have included in the planning document. We have our introduction into the whole document as the first chapter. We cover a pretty good overview of the district and the transit system, what it currently is at this point. Our third section, we do discuss our service planning process and evaluation for how we go about making service changes and things like that. Section 4, we cover a lot of the financials and the operating plan, and that is the section, the chapter that our future service plans are going to be included in. The 5th section will cover a lot of our capital projects and our CIP, our capital improvement plan. And then we do also include some language about strategic planning and marketing, promotional campaigns, and then a short, brief conclusion that wraps up the document. A lot of the planning document is made up of the appendices. Now, these are the data sources that we use to support all of the things that are included in the planning document. So you'll see a number of different things here. And if you've already looked at the planning document, the appendices make up a majority of it. So we've got the abridged budget and some smart right information, the financial forecasting model assumptions. So a lot of these are primarily the data sources that are used for the SRTP and the planning decisions that we make for the planning document. So just to cover, the primary goals of the SRTP were basically planning, coordination, and engagement. So the document, of course, it's a planning document. It's something that we want to have in place. We want to have a sensible plan in place to use as we move forward over the next 5 years, and how we decide to make service changes and how we decide to make service improvements depending on what's happening in the region right now. Of course, the big things that we're considering right now have been the pandemic impacts and then the current labor shortages. Another big goal of this document was coordination. We spent quite an amount of time coordinating with our partner agencies, with all of the local jurisdictions, just because this is the type of document that we all really need to be on the same page. And we kind of wanted to make sure that we're all sharing the same vision for how we want transit service to look like in the region. And then engagement with the public is obviously very huge. We can't create a plan like this without knowing and hearing from the community and getting public feedback. That's where we glean most of our very helpful and important information when it comes to designing transit service and making service changes. And we want to make sure that we're doing what's right and what is most meaningful to you guys. So here is a list of some of the considerations that went into the 5-year service plan, which plans for future service, the future transit service. So we're still considering Sacramento Forward project goals. That was the bus network redesign project from 2019. And the COVID-19 pandemic, the transit impacts that were caused by the pandemic, was also some considerations that went into planning the future service improvements. Regional growth and development, how new areas in the region are becoming developed. There's a lot of areas out there that are being developed that don't currently have transit service or don't have much transit service. So that's something that's also considered. And then we're always getting your feedback, and we get complaints and feedback forwarded to us from our customer advocates. So we're always kind of staying in the loop on, what are the major complaints and what are the major things, the hardships that are out there right now with our service. And then a few other things, unmet transit needs. That's an annual process that we do with SACOG every year. And we discuss the unmet transit needs within the region. So we take a look at those. Budget is a big consideration as well. And then just trying to build ridership and recover from the pandemic impacts and what that did to ridership and how we saw ridership decline. We want to build that back up. And equity, of course, and the climate action efforts that are happening right now. So those are a list of some of the major considerations that were considered when we developed the 5-year service plan. This is a snapshot of what we came up with, what the proposed service improvements are going to be that are included in the SRTP. We had our marketing staff do a nice little brochure that right now it's being distributed. It's on the vehicles, and we're going to try to push this out, I think, over the next couple of weeks too, as well, maybe with street team staff or something. That's still kind of in the works, but we're trying to get this information, this brochure, into the hands of as many patrons as possible. It's got a lot of good information, and it's just basically a summary of what we're proposing for the service plan. The SRTP does briefly touch on several different service improvements, one being service to the airport and what future service plans look like to the airport. Of course, the Green Line Light Rail extension, that is still a project that's being managed by planning. More details and the Green Line extension will be focused on a lot more in our long-range transit plan, but it is mentioned in the SRTP. And then also the future extension for Route 11, there is a potential change for Route 11, and that is included in the 5-year service plan. I think it's a little bit further on in the plan as far as which year that would be implemented in. But that's kind of a rough idea, that's not really set in stone. But just making sure that improvement is included in the SRTP. Wanted to bring that up and make sure that everybody knew that's included in there. And then transit service planning for the cities of Folsom and Elk Grove, 2 of the cities that have recently annexed into the district. We are coordinating and working with the cities of Folsom and Elk Grove to plan for future transit services in both of those areas. Early on, we did do some outreach in Folsom. And we're in coordination with the city of Folsom planning on future transit services. There's been a few discussions on what bus routes would look like out in Folsom. And we're still kind of in the process of reviewing routing options for that. But that is included in the SRTP, as well as transit service improvements for Elk Grove. I would say that the biggest comment that we've received so far in the SRTP outreach is weekend transit service in Elk Grove. That seems to be a big ask, a big request for a lot of folks. And that is included in the 5-year service plan. So that is something that we're taking a close look at, and we're trying to, consider when that would make the most sense and when it would be appropriate. But I know that getting weekend transit service in Elk Grove is a big request from a lot of people. The long-range planning document is going to cover more of the last two. The Blue Line extension. I did want to mention that very briefly as a project. It is a capital project that is briefly mentioned in this planning document and will be carried over in a lot more detail in the long-range transit plan. So public outreach, we have the open comment period that began on February 14th, and it's continuing until next week, the 16th of March. We are just trying to present the SRTP and get as much feedback as we can, answer as many questions as we can about the planning document, and all of the comments that we receive during this comment period, we will analyze all those comments. We'll include them in the staff report and the board item that will be going to the board in April. And we're looking at adopting the SRTP in April. So this slide is a little bit outdated. This was from last week. I would say since last week, we've gotten at least a dozen more comments just over the last week with the outreach that we've been doing. So I'd say a couple dozen comments received via email, phone. Don't really get letters, but I have had a few. And some of the common feedback, like I mentioned, Elk Grove weekend service is a big one. That's something that we hear quite often. We have a lot of folks asking questions about Smart Ride and the future of Smart Ride and microtransit service. And then just basically requesting for transit service in areas that are not currently served right now, areas of new development, like Delta Shores, for example. The project schedule moving forward, we're going to wrap up the 30-day review and comment period here within the next week. We'll spend a little bit of time analyzing the comments and feedback that we've gotten, see if there's anything else that needs to be finalized in order to finalize the plan and take that to the board in April for final adoption. So that is the project schedule moving forward. The long-range transit plan is the next big effort after the Srtp is adopted. We're then going to turn our focus on the LRTP. So here is just a few of the items that will be included in the LRTP and really focused on, including BRT corridor plans, bus services to large developments, such as Delta Shores, Jackson Corridor, just to name a few. There's a lot of different areas within our service area that are developing pretty rapidly. And then a lot of our light rail modernization plans will be also included in the LRTP. Green Line extension to the airport, of course, and then additional light rail extensions to Elk Grove and Citrus Heights. Here is my contact information for all of you that do not have it already. You can feel free to contact me via phone, email, if you have any other questions, any comments or feedback that you want to leave pertaining to the Srtp and the plan document that is online right now for public review. I would encourage everybody to get on the website and take a look at that document and just communicate your comments and questions with us. We'll take some questions right now. We've got about 30 minutes to answer any questions, or we'll open it up for feedback here. Let me stop sharing real quick. Bear with me, folks. Okay. Let me first see if I can work and unmute folks. There's so very few participants and so very few questions here that maybe we can just verbally come and chat here. Let's see. Okay, so for the 3 attendees that we have, and that I have Dan Allison, Glenn, and Jeffrey Tardigia, I have allowed you to talk. If you've unmuted yourself, please put yourself back on mute, but I do believe, thank you. I do believe we are all able to speak now. So Jeffrey, you're at the top of the list. I see you're unmuted, and I see that you did not have a question typed out into the Q&A, but if you do have a question or comment, I'm happy to take that right now. If you want to go first.
Well, James Drake, the question is going to be about the 142. Is it going to be corresponding in the hour allocation versus YOLO's 30-minute bus? In other words, you've heard me complain repeatedly about the L corridor of the buses all bunched together. And so I'm wondering on the 142, are we going to have the 142 and the 42A and the 42B all within 15 minutes of each other? How's that for a question?
Yeah, I take it you're asking about in April when we change headways to hourly and roll back 30-minute headways. Hourly, it's probably going to be a little simple. We're probably basically just going to scratch half the trips on the schedule because it being kind of a short notice thing. There are kind of administrative technical difficulties to completely like redoing the schedule. It's a lot easier to just scratch a trip, basically a trip or a day's work that would have been bid by an operator. Just cancel that work. Changing the schedule around itself, it's not something we can do on short notice like that. So I think it's the first morning trip, and then every other trip will basically be scratched. And that's just how it's going to have to be for starting in April. When we bring it back in September, I assume I don't know definitively, but I assume, suspect, or at least hope we'll bring it back in September. There may be a chance then to time it with YOLO bus, but they're kind of in flux too. We always need about a 6-month lead time to lock schedules in. We don't always know what theirs is going to be. So having them change kind of in a similar time frame to us isn't totally ideal for planning around and coordinating. When we're at 30-minute headways, I think there's kind of less of a need for it to be staggered perfectly. There was a period where YOLO bus was hourly at the airport, we're hourly at the airport. In that situation, for sure, we'd like to kind of just stagger them 30 minutes apart. And it worked kind of nicely for a while when we were, I think, twice an hour, and YOLO bus was once an hour. But with things kind of in flux, it's just a little hard to know for sure where they'll be when, and they have their own timelines and board considerations and everything too. So I think the answer is kind of no there. Sorry, Jeffrey. But good comment. And yeah, as things kind of stabilize, it's something we'll be thinking about.
Okay. So let's see. I have some questions or comments here from Dan Allison. Dan, if you want to unmute and just ask the questions or share the comments, you're more than welcome to, or I can read them off. It's up to you if you want to unmute and speak.
This is Dan.
Hi, Dan.
I'll read what I asked. I found the document hard to use. The plan info is buried amongst all the background and history info. I think it should be reorganized to bring chapters 4 and 5 up to the top.
Okay.
The rest of it is less important to the public or background information. I had to read the entire document to find info that I was looking for, and no member of the public should be expected to do that. There may be legal requirements that you have to include all that information, but that's not what the public wants. The public wants service and capital.
Yeah.
Second question, is new development being asked to pay for capital and operations costs to serve that new development?
So yes, a lot of the negotiations with city planners, county planners, and developers, I do believe, and it's generally goes through, from my understanding, is brought up through them on our behalf, on transit's behalf, whether or not to include transit fees, whether it be transit infrastructure fees or transit fees for operations. I do believe that that's typically discussed between jurisdiction and developer. We do work pretty closely with the jurisdictions on those types of things. We always do want to see large developments having those kinds of things included in with their project developments, is those kinds of fees for transit. So yes, to answer your question, more or less, yes, we do request that large developments consider paying for transit impact fees. And I think the county actually has a program that they typically, there's a procedure, or there's a program in place that the county has. I don't know the details of it and how exactly it works, but that's typically approached through the county and through the city. Is that correct, James?
Well, yeah, it depends a little on where you are. So, and our department deals a little less with this, but as an example, the county has actually a pretty progressive, pretty transit favorable general plan. The result of that plan is basically what you have out in the Jackson corridor, where there are 4 major plan developments, big specific plan developments, several square miles, where the general plan, basically says, you're going to add this much traffic to existing roads. You're going to create this many VMTs and GHGs, greenhouse gases, and you have to keep it below this certain level. Don't ask me what level. That's frankly, I'm not an expert on that, but I can tell you we've worked because of those requirements. All of those developments have had to cost out what it will cost to add transit service out to that area. They've all had to prepare financing plans to show exactly how much money would have to be raised to help support transit, both operations and capital, and to make that part of their approvals. Their public facility financing plan is part of these big project approvals they do for these projects. So the source for that revenue would come through the property tax bill. And there's entire departments at the county, special districts people that could tell you exactly what kind of legal vehicle it is. But the upshot is it's really a pretty progressive policy for funding transit operations and capital according to a plan, a fair, thought out standards-based plan. That's not the only, that operates through the general plan. There's also the Sacramento County Transportation Development Fee Program. It puts a one-time fee on a lot of projects. There are certain conditions, which again, I have to plead ignorance on exactly what the geographies and conditions are. But that's usually more on the capital side. It can be, I think we've used it in the past for buses. I think it can in principle be used for bus stops. And then there's some very specific stuff, kind of as you get closer to the airport. There's right-of-way set aside for both track as well as stations, and I believe even maintenance yard out there. That'd probably be a little more in James Boyle's department, or maybe Kevin Schroeder. I think he's listening in, but I don't know if he was queued up for full discussion on this. But on the planning side, that'd be a little more on our long range side. And it's a little bit in our grants and finance side as well.
Thank you. The reason I asked the question is because the plan says studying how to serve new developments, but it doesn't say anything about how that service gets paid for. And that obviously raises concerns because there have been a lot of big developments in the past that did not pay anything other than the base impact fee, which is completely insufficient to run transit. So that's why I'm asking the question.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Dan.
I think it's a really good question. I don't know that completely answering it or solving that question is within the scope of the project, but I would venture to say that there's not a complete and comprehensive policy and consistency across our entire service area. I mean, we cover several different local jurisdictions that have the regulatory authority. We coordinate with them on a lot of day-to-day operational stuff, and in terms of long-term funding things, a lot of that is more kind of catch as catch can, take what we can get, things develop on kind of an episodic basis. And I would say that does end up with some regimes of regulation and funding that aren't totally consistent or comprehensive. I mean, if you go build out in a greenfield, you're going to need water, you're going to need power, and these are true monopolies, right? You're not going to get those. You're not going to build a house or an office or anything without those. So they get paid for. Transit, people like to say that it's a necessity, that it's a requirement. I think we view the service we provide as being very crucial for many of our customers, but it's not necessarily always treated the same way as some other public utilities where there is truly just one service provider. The reality for a lot of people moving into new neighborhoods is their transportation provider is just going to be the car in their garage. And that's not something that's great for the climate. It's not great economically, but that may be the reality we face, that we don't always have that same kind of monopolistic ability to just charge what we need to charge to fund 100% of our operations. So I've turned this into a kind of a long-winded answer. Apologies here, but it's one reason why it's really great to have members of the public show up and ask good questions. And I know many of you are supportive of transit. So we may not win that battle today or at this very meeting, but I thank you for asking, Dan, and hope that sheds a little light on it. I wish I could answer it a little better.
Thank you for the information. I understand you're in planning and not in the thing that makes all that stuff happen. But I would ask then that the plan have some more detail on that kind of question and not just mention it as something coming up, but how's it going to be dealt with? And my last question is, has there been any evaluation of the on-demand microtransit service and impact on the budget? The reason I ask that is because the plan really highlights that service, but I have not seen any evaluation of the program. And I realize it's still being called a pilot, and it was with special funding that has a limited time frame, but nevertheless, it's in the plan. So my question is, has it been evaluated? Thank you.
As far as I know, there hasn't really been, the only evaluation that I know of that I've been just a little bit involved in is planning for future zones. The future of the service, how it will continue past the pilot program. I haven't been too privy to those discussions or how that's all being dealt with and planned for after 2023. James, do you have any information, anything more to share on Future Smart Ride? How that's being
a true
evaluated, assessed?
thorough analysis, which is, I think, what Dan's talking about here, really hasn't been part of the scope of the SRTP, right? It is a pilot project where funding ends in 2023. That doesn't mean that there's not a need for such an analysis, right? Srtp has had many runs at a local sales tax along with our partners. And I think it's been pretty widely understood that a continuation of the Smart Ride program is both one of the things being kind of offered to kind of entice supporters to increase sales tax, as well as one of the beneficiaries, if a sales tax were passed, that would provide a sustainable source for Smart Ride. So, we haven't scoped that in this project, and we don't have any funding right now for, an additional study on that. I know we have had some discussions departmentally about that need and about putting together something like that. I mean, some agencies will do this. They'll hire Nelson Nygaard, or, some have worked with universities. We could do an analysis in-house. It just hasn't been in the scope of this SRTP.
Well, I would say that it should be, because when the special funding ends, if the expectation is that the program continues, then it's in direct competition with fixed route service. And that needs to be addressed. And that's within the 5-year period when that change would happen. So that needs to be called out in the plan as an issue. I'm not saying there's an answer now, but it needs to be called out in the plan as an issue that's coming up within that 5-year transit planning period. Because I personally am very concerned about what happens when the special funding is over. Everybody's going to think, oh, this was a permanent thing that's going to last forever. And if so, it's going to hurt fixed route service.
That's a good
Yeah.
suggestion, Dan. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, I mean, some of the things we've observed is it can, in some cases, I think, compete with fixed route. In other cases, I think it can be complementary to fixed route. It has a different cost benefit structure than fixed route. It's used at one of the applications, certainly not the only one, is to serve our lower density areas, our lower demand areas. But you know, the cost of it is a little more, it's a variable cost. It's not fixed route. Fixed schedule service is also fixed cost. There's always excess capacity. Smart Ride can be the victim of its own success. Some of our areas where it's been the most successful in attracting riders, that can in some respects be a problem, because the more riders you attract, the more buses you have to put out there. It's a variable cost. So yeah, I think it's a very good point, Dan. Thank you. I should probably yield back the mic here so we can get to a couple other questions.
Yeah, so we've got a few from Glenn Mandelkern, and hi, Glenn. Me and Glenn spoke not too long ago before the meeting.
How you doing?
Kind of touch on these a little bit. So yeah, Glenn, your suggestion here about sharing the posts, the online discussion groups, sharing our links, and just the information about the project and the plan document with peers and folks and groups that you're advocating for. I think that's a really great idea. You know, we want to get this plan exposed to as much of the community as we can. So did you want to kind of touch on that a little bit? I see your first question here is related to that, what we talked about earlier.
Well, yes, is that in like I said there in daily, in talking about well, right now the group that comes to mind, because you guys actually come up there in discussion from time to time. Many times favorably, sometimes people do issue complaints like the one you were talking about. I was thinking of Sacramento Reddit. Okay. I thought maybe I might do it myself. I was thinking of doing it myself. I could post a link and say, you know, that you at Srtp would like more input from the public there, and I could post a link as to where your contact info is. The other one, what I was thinking about just in general, topics come up, people say things on Facebook, on their Facebook accounts, or maybe they're in Facebook groups, or they're on Twitter, and then something comes up that is related to transit and life here in Sacramento. So then people could post a link to your Srtp to suggest improvements or input on related matters.
Yeah, you can, I would encourage you to share that link to the webpage where we have the document linked to. So if there's folks out there that you feel like would be good reviewers of that.
All right.
And yes, that sounds good.
Yeah, I'd like to encourage others to do it too. So,
well, it's a really good reminder, because I occasionally dabble in work-related social media myself. I do a little bit of the Twitter, And
Okay.
oftentimes I forget some of the basics of just kind of forwarding and or retweeting posts about some of our own projects. So I think that's a very good reminder. Thank you, Glenn.
All right.
Okay, Glenn, you've got a comment here about something that was brought up at last week's public meeting, the
That's
potential
correct.
extension of Route 1 from Citrus Heights to Folsom. You
Right.
have suggested extending it to the Glen Station
Yes.
because of more space maybe there to turn buses around for layover purposes and things of that nature. So thank you. I'll capture that comment. Did you want to add
Okay.
anything on to your comment?
No, just no. On that particular issue, when I thought about just the area there in general by the historic Folsom, because over where one ends today, it does lay over right in that in the Sunrise Small Transit Center, and it has plenty of space to do so, and also to turn around, but it seems more tricky over by historic Folsom. So I thought of the next station down, and it happens to be the Glen Station. So, but the Glen Station does have a lot more space. There's also side streets, Park Shore, and I don't remember the other one there. It's I just remember right now. I remember there's Kikoman. I don't remember that other side street, but you know, the buses could either go around that way, and also they could do the layover by the Glen Station. There's a big parking lot there. There's ample space on the street too. So,
You know, it's not an idea I've ever thought of. We do. I appreciate you sharing that because we do have problems with the turnaround at historic Folsom because those streets are so tight. So 30-foot bus is fine. 40-foot bus, no way. One issue I do see with Glen Station is I'm thinking we would come in, you know, across the river and straight up Folsom Boulevard. And yeah, we could probably turn around with a loop like Glen Drive. There's just like a Coolidge Drive. I don't know if that's
oh,
off.
is that what it is? Okay, yeah.
And to Park Shore. That does have us cross light rail twice. And all other things being equal, we do dislike having the buses slowed down by our own train system.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so
Okay.
there's pros and cons to everything, but you know, it's
Sure.
not something. It's worth a thought because, like I said, like you pointed out, there are some constraints at historic Folsom.
Okay.
Okay, guys. We've got just a few minutes left, and Jeffrey, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah.
Do you have another question or comment you wanted to share before we conclude?
Yes, the comment is effectively, right now you have, because of the expansion of the 50, you have a couple of underpasses that you, in a sense, are going to have bus interference. I am wondering for the future, what you have anticipated with some of the other changes that are going on. I will bring to mind the 19th Street rail, crossings of having multiple, shall we say, passenger trains going on there, how that's going to interlock with a number of your east-west bus routes. I didn't see that being considered, and I think that is expected to be completed by 2025, that the 19 corridor is going to be utilized. So how are you addressing that?
Yeah, I think you're right that it's I think it's 2025 that the train service, the San Joaquin train service, is expected to start operating in the 20th Street corridor. You know, that's why light rail has a bridge, right? The trains can't get slowed down. The light rail trains, to be clear, can't get slowed down by passenger trains by freight trains. It would just throw off way too many things. For buses, you know, we're probably stuck in the same traffic as cars. You know, if you've got an east-west route, and there's, you know, new passenger train coming through, same as a freight train, we're just going to have to wait. I mean, if passenger trains are short enough, we may work out a detour if we're finding that we regularly get snagged by one of these trains, but it's not a terminal station, so I wouldn't think the trains would be dwelling there super long.
And you're right, in a sense, it is more the freight trains that, and I just curious over the time
There've been a
period.
couple the last 2 days.
You know, going through there with as many of the miles that are going through is what you figured out of how, I'm thinking particularly of the Route 51 of, you know, it's no longer 15 minutes, it's 35 minutes before it's going to be cleared because that train is 7 miles long.
Yeah, I mean, the freight trains, unfortunately don't get those as often. I've just seen them out there the last 2 mornings.
It just brings to mind suggestion of having more interaction and interplay, knowing when those are likely going to be, because they obviously have to run a schedule, so that, you know, you can anticipate more of that, and whether you build in an accommodation for it. It's just a thought.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Real quickly before we end the meeting, Glenn did have one last comment, question. The Folsom Ranch area south of 50 will have 10,000 plus homes built. So yes, Glenn, we've been meeting with the city of Folsom planners, and we have been discussing some potential transit routes out to serve this area as developed.
Yes, I'm very glad to hear that, because, you know, one very popular topic here is we have a housing shortage, but then the next thing that some people add is we're going to take care of some of that with many homes in Folsom. So, I would like to see or hear that transit is going to be part of that too. And when people think of Folsom Ranch, they'll know that's available as well.
Yeah, we're looking at some of the routing that may make sense. James, I think, has kind of maybe even started penciling some things out or some ideas or something, but it is an ongoing effort that working with the city of Folsom on as that area develops.
In Folsom, frankly, I haven't done any work on fixed route there, but I think Folsom Ranch is actually a pretty good example of some of the upsides of Smart Ride. You know, with the Smart Ride zone in Folsom before Folsom Ranch was not our lowest ridership zone, but probably in the lower half. We added Folsom Ranch to that zone. Trying to remember the date. I mean, it was probably about a year ago, and no budget impact. I mean, the existing Folsom Smart Ride basically was undersubscribed. So we just enlarged the zone to include Folsom Ranch. And, you know, the budget analyst in me does have some concerns with Smart Ride, which does have a higher cost per passenger than fixed route bus. I mean, there is no way with a van going from point A to B to C to D to E to carry as many people per hour as a 40-foot bus going down Broadway. There just isn't. You know, it's public transportation, but, you know, a taxi cab is also public transportation, and no one's under any illusion that a taxi cab or Uber is, you know, moving bus loads of people. It's not mass transit, right? So those are some concerns I think we all have. The flip side is, I mean, Folsom Ranch, and like Dan mentioned, with money for expansion of the system being what it is, having some constraints. The timeline to get fixed route service out there, to me, it's one of many, many, many needs that the system has. We have unmet needs all in every council district, every supervisorial district. We have unmet needs. We have complete gaps in service. We have areas where it doesn't run late enough, doesn't run often enough. And Folsom Ranch would have been one of many of those, and maybe not even that high on the list. When you look at proximity to the rest of the network, when you look at, households in poverty and socioeconomic equity, might not have ranked that high. With Smart Ride, instead of residents of Folsom Ranch waiting around till next year or the year after, they've got service now. Those people can start using transit and they can become Sacramento customers. They can be bought into the system. They can become fans. They can become public supporters. They can be people who will vote and support, additional funding and support for transit. They may not use it as many times per year as someone living in Oak Park or someone living downtown. But if they use it and like it, they can be a really important source of support, and it helps people live a car-free lifestyle. So I think it's a really good example of some of the upside of Smart Ride, to kind of trade off with some of the, financial cost per passenger challenges of it.
Thanks, Jamie.
Okay, I just had one very brief question of Folsom. I was gonna type this in earlier, but since you personally said that you haven't worked so much on the planning of Folsom routes, I was under the impression, number one, that Folsom area, those routes, Sacramento just recently acquired them, right? You own them now, right?
Correct.
Oh, okay. So my brief question was, if you own them now, would this be the time to possibly revisit and redesign some of them? And as a starting idea, what about splitting the west side of F10 from the east side of F10?
Or the north side of it from the south side?
Oh, I guess. Oh, or that too. I was thinking about splitting it at historic Folsom. So one side is west of the river. When I was saying west or east, I was thinking from
The part
historic
west of
Folsom.
it isn't very long.
What's that?
The part west of the river isn't very long.
Oh, so you wouldn't gain much there. Okay. Well, it was just a thought. It's another one of these things that I, especially as a writer, I'm a very big fan of, from many personal experiences, and maybe you as a general consumer. One big thing that's needed for people to adopt a product or a service is ease of use. And so if a route is difficult to understand, people won't use it. But if they understand clearly marked distinctions, that's why I made that one. I do like, however, that from time to time you do remind us that there are the budgetary things to consider. I also know that by that suggestion I requested, I'm actually requesting two different routes, which means two different buses, two physical buses and two physical drivers. Nevertheless, since you now get a chance to re-examine Folsom, especially as more people move there, I think it would be good to look at the area, look at the existing routes, and if it makes sense, given your background, to redesign them, especially in forms that are easy to understand, or easier.
I think we're a little over time, but Sarah,
Yeah.
if it's all right, I'll maybe give a quick response and then we can wrap.
Yeah, you can just respond real quickly, and then for anybody else that has service suggestions or any additional comments or something, just shoot me an email.
Yeah, there's always been a design question, I think, in the service to and near Folsom. Yeah, historically, it was a separate agency. You know, in theory, things should be coordinated. In reality, when it's separate, a lot of times it doesn't end up well coordinated. So you always had this kind of handoff between the Folsom 10 bus and, back in the day, the Sacramento Route 24 at Main and Madison. It was, yeah, was it just about a year ago? Was it 2 years? I forget now, but the Folsom now is part of Sacramento. But as part of that agreement for the Folsom service to become part of Sacramento, we agreed that for a period of several years, I forget how many, to basically leave things as is. You know, there's a reason that local municipalities have their own systems. Some suburban cities have had, you know, complaints, and not just here in Sacramento. I don't mean anywhere here in Sacramento, but it's a very common thing for satellite cities, suburban cities, to start their own systems so they can get full control of their system, so that they can get the monies that come in through sales tax, gas tax to the state, that come back to them. They can get full control of it. So there's often reluctance to relinquish that control to one big regional agency. So the terms in which they became part of Sacramento include some caution about not changing things too quickly. At some point, we do, you know, that kind of comes to an end and it becomes just like any other Sacramento route. That doesn't mean that Sacramento wants to turn things upside down either. It's like you said, there's a time for kind of looking at it and going, well, could we be doing this a little differently, a little better? You know, and to me, that connection, that forced transfer that was kind of inherited from the old system comes to mind. The service west of the river on the 10 up on American River Canyon Drive. I mean, that kind of has always struck me as maybe not prime territory for fixed route at all. It's pretty long mileage without a ton of ridership demand. Today it's covered by Smart Ride service. To me, that's exactly the kind of territory you cover with a Smart Ride type service, and you kind of conserve your resources for fixed route in the more built up areas. Maybe you can reallocate those resources to have one, you know, transfer free connection all the way across from Sunrise Boulevard all the way out to Folsom. But at this stage, I think we kind of felt it was maybe a little premature, and it's probably a little better to just leave things as is.
Thanks, James.
Okay, I appreciate the explanation. Thanks a
Yep.
lot.
Thank you all for attending. Thanks for the great discussion and the great feedback. We appreciate it. If anything comes to mind down the road, feel free to call me or email me. And yeah, we'll conclude this evening's meeting. Thanks everybody for joining.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining in.
Have a great night.